Hi everyone, my name's Tanner, and if you haven't seen us before, my wife Amy and I design and make all the pieces that we sell, and today's video is going to be about binding a book. So we have a lot of DIYers coming to our booth all the time or asking us online, how do you bind your books? How do I refill an existing journal that I might have or one of yours that I've bought? And so today I'm going to walk you through my favorite binding and how I do it. I have two different styles of leather that I'm showing today. This one is a softer chrome tan leather. On this one we just sort of etched or burnt our images on there. This has a wrap style closure that works with this binding that we're going to be discussing today. We also have this beautiful hand carved journal that Amy made. So she did all the carving by hand. We hand dyed it. It's vegetable tan leather. It's a stiffer, thicker leather, but it also works with the same type of wrap style closure and the same binding. We also do a variety of different types of locks that we buy and add on to our hand carved journals here. So these ones are, both of these are vegetable tan leather, and we added on different types of locks, but it doesn't matter. It works with the binding and it works with the leather itself. And so this one has one of our custom metal plates added to the front, and then Amy's done some hand carving as well. All the same though, all of these books, we use the same binding and a variety of closures for them. So you can kind of pick which type of closure you want for your book. It doesn't really matter which type of leather, that doesn't matter either. So I have a variety of different threads with me today that I'm going to show you, and we're going to use this one to bind the book, which is a waxed nylon thread. You can buy a thread like this from Tandy Leather or even Walmart in the craft section. I really like that one. I love the wax thread because I find it holds the binding nice and secure. This is a different type of waxed nylon thread. This is heavier waxing on here. It's nice, it's very secure, but it does often leave a little bit of the wax on the paper and sometimes on your hands in the book as well. So if you don't mind that, this is a really good option, especially if you're a little rougher on the journal. You know, if it's in your backpack or your purse and you're traveling a lot with it, it might be a good option. This one here is a linen thread, and my wife purchased this at Michael's. So for something like this, you would want to run it across a brick of beeswax and wax it up just a little bit as it's unwaxed, and it can be kind of slippery. It'll definitely work, especially if you wax it, but if you don't wax it, you might find that your binding comes loose during the course of using it. Not the end of the world. You might just have to do a little extra maintenance and redo the knots and that kind of thing. And this one right here is polyester. It's an artificial sinew thread. It is waxed, and you can also get that at Tandy and possibly maybe fabric stores or something like that. But I like that one as well. It does slip a little bit more than the nylon thread, so I tend to use more of the nylon thread. However, you can do alternative types of knots, or you can leave a little extra of the sinew and the linen thread at the end of your binding, which I'll discuss later, again, to kind of show you what I mean. But you can leave a little extra, and that way you can re-tie the knots if they happen to come loose or come undone before you're done with the pages that you've bound in there, before everything's full. You might have to redo those ones more likely than these ones. Okay, so today I'm using a needle that is for leatherwork specifically. It has a blunt end on it, which is preferable because when you're sewing through here, it's easy to catch your finger by accident or something like that. You definitely don't want to do that. And it's also easier to push through the leather if you have if the hole ends up being a little bit smaller than you wanted. And it has a nice big eye hole on it, and that's important because this thread is thicker, so it's not like sewing for putting a button on your shirt or something. You kind of need a larger eye hole to capacitate this thread. Aside from leather specific needles like this one, you can also use upholstery, tapestry, darning, or finishing needles. So they have larger eye holes as well, and they can capacitate this thicker thread, or some of the other threads like the other nylon thread I showed on the bigger spool earlier is even thicker than this one. And so you definitely want to have something that will work with the thread, and you're not sitting there kind of struggling to get it through. I'm using lined paper for the book I'm working on today. Basically, I made the file on InDesign for the lined pages, and then I print them off myself on our desktop laser printer. You can do this with an inkjet as well, but you have to remember to let the pages dry before you fold them, otherwise you create a real mess. You can also use a photocopier, or if you're super hardcore, you can use a ruler and draw out your own lines on there. That gives a really cool antique look. I've personally only found one pre-lined ream of heavier weight paper with lines on it, but the paper was 6 to 7 times the cost of a nice blank 24-pound paper. So we opted just to print our own in this case. In about half of the books we make, we switch between 24-pound paper like this or a 28-pound. And we also use a wide variety of different thicknesses of cardstocks as well. For your journal, you can use any type of paper you want. You can decorate it, or you can tear the edges and create this kind of antique look, kind of old world look for your journal if you like. So when I'm folding the signatures of paper, a signature of paper is just a group of paper folded in half. I know that's often not clear when you're first learning with bookbinding, but it's just literally taking a pile of paper, folding it in half, and creating a group of paper. That's called a signature. So when I'm making my signatures, I fold them in half by hand, and then I take a bone folder. I've got a couple different ones here, and I run them along the edge. This particular one I got at Michael's. I think it's a Martha Stewart one. I like this one. I love the feel of it, and it's got that kind of curved edge. I find that it works better than the flat ones. However, you might prefer this one. This one I think is a Tandy one, or something similar to Tandy anyhow. This one's more like a ruler almost, with a nice kind of beveled edge on it. Either one will do a great job for you. You just kind of run it down the edge of the paper, and what it does is it creates a nice crisp edge there for you. And so that's nice. That keeps the binding nice and tight on your pages, and it really makes the book look a lot more uniform. And otherwise, if you don't use them, I find that the books kind of get this kind of puffy look to them. It's not the end of the world, but this is kind of a nice touch. Okay, so I'm just going to do an example here for the signatures. So I just line it up by hand. I just kind of eyeball it, keep it pretty close along the edge. And then I keep my fingers pressed down like this in about the middle of the page, depending on the size of your hand, of course. And then I take my thumbs and I rub down the edge here to give it a quick crease. And that minimalizes the amount that the edge kind of has variation there. Of course, they are going to have a little bit of variation, being that the interior ones are going to poke out a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with this type of edge. A lot of people just leave the pages like that. We choose to cut them with our industrial paper cutter, but you don't have to do that. And then once I've got the signature kind of created like that, again, just run the bone folder down the edge and finish it off. And now it's ready to go, and in our case we'd be chopping down the edge. In your case, you may be ready at this point just to bind it into your book after you poke the holes in it. So if you're doing a 9x6 journal, this is already the right size for it. If you're doing, say, something like what we're doing today, a 5x7 journal, you can just quickly take a ruler and kind of mark it off. If you don't have a paper cutter or that kind of thing, you can just sort of mark off at 7 and 5, for example, in this case. Or if you were doing a 4x6 journal, you would have folded the pages the other way, so vertically fold them and then just cut them right in half. And so that way you can create a variety of different sizes of paper quite easily and quickly. And you can just do it on like one of these mats. If you don't have a paper cutter, you could use a rotary cutter and a ruler to do that, or you can use a craft store paper cutter if you have one or if you want to get one. They're relatively inexpensive, and you can definitely cut each page one at a time that way, maybe 2 at a time with the craft store cutters. So this is our paper cutter. We have an industrial office paper cutter, so it's different from the craft store ones that I mentioned earlier. You don't have to have one like this, but we do so many books that it's to our advantage to have one that's can handle a little bit more. And with this one, I can cut the full signatures at a time, even if it's cardstock. So that's really important for us in terms of keeping everything going smoothly. One thing I'll point out before I get started is that we have done our own little markings here on the bed of the cutter, and this is just showing where each of our main sizes of paper need to be cut, so that we can quickly just go ahead and cut them without having to do a bunch of calculations or remeasure things or remember where we're supposed to put things. And so the first thing I do for the books today, they're going to be 5x7. We have the even edge on both sides that I cut. That is now ready for a 5x7 journal. And in case you were wondering, yes, I always wear cufflinks when binding books. So now we're ready to poke the holes in that we'll use for actually binding the pages into the journal. What I've done is I've created a cardstock template. And the way I created that was just by taking the piece of cardstock lining it up, cutting it, in this case, to a 5x7 size, and then lining it up with the spine and marking it off with a pencil. And then I just poked my awl through at each of the 4 spots and folded it inside out, so it was nice and flexible but strong. I like cardstock better than regular because it lasts longer for a template. You will have to redo these frequently, but they're very handy. All right, so if you, in the event that you were only wanting to do just one journal, or you're just doing it for fun, you might not want to make the template. That's okay. Another way you can do it is just to line up your actual signature right on the casing of the journal. Line it up about where you want it. Try to be as specific as possible. Mark off on the outside page where the holes are. Then take your outside page off the outside of your signature. Turn it inside out carefully. And insert it into the center of the signature. So basically the same thing as the template, but using actual page off the signature itself. And then that gives you the same type of effect where you have the holes marked off, and you can now take the awl and simply puncture through where you've got the marking of the pencil. It's important how you hold it. You don't want to poke yourself in the finger. After you've done that a couple times, you'll definitely remember, but I like to hold it like this so I don't damage the pages. And then I can also give a nice equal pressure. So I do, and then I flip it around like that. If you try to do it the other way, you're going to end up folding the paper, probably poking yourself in the hand too. So it doesn't feel good. These awls are very, very sharp. So now we have that signature done, and then I just take the page off again, as otherwise it will not be lined up anymore. In my case, since I cut the edges, I definitely want to put it back on the outside. And now it's ready to be stitched into the journal once we have completed the rest of the signatures. All right, so now I'm going to measure out the thread that I need. Usually I go 4.5 to 5 times. So I'll show you what I mean. I go all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. So that's important. You don't want to just do it between the holes. It'll end up too short, or it'll be so close it'll be really hard to tie the knots at the end, and you don't really want that. You are going to have a little extra thread that you cut off at the end. Don't worry about it. It's necessary so you get a nice tight binding and the knots work out properly. So we have 1, 3, 4, and I'm going to do 5 in this case, so approximately 5 lengths. Now, for this journal, and actually for all the journals that we do, we like to use copper jump rings to mark the end of the binding. You don't have to use one. You could just do a big knot, or you could add a bead or some other charm that you like. It doesn't really matter, but in our case, we really like to mark the end of the binding with the jump ring. I think it looks nice, and I feel that it helps keep the knots even more secure than not using one. Also, this helps you identify the end of the binding so you can undo the knot and reuse the thread, especially if it's your own journal. As I mentioned earlier, and I'll show you at the end here, you can leave the excess thread a bit longer on the inside, and that way you can just keep reusing that piece of thread for a number of bindings. Depends on the thread and how you use the book, how long the thread will last, but you could probably use it several times before you need to switch to a new piece of thread, or you could switch thread every time. It doesn't matter. Okay, so I've got the journal laying face down now, and I'm going to start over here. You don't want to start over here. You want to start at the back of the journal, which is going to be this hole. So sometimes it seems straightforward until you go to do it, and then it gets a little bit turned around. You start with this hole going from the outside of the journal to the inside. Pull the thread all the way up. It's nice and snug. Now for this one, and for all our journals, we always do some sort of cover page for the front and the back. You don't have to do that. You could do a different type of paper, different color. It doesn't really matter. And then I kind of line these up just in case that there's a little bit of differentiation there or something. And the way I poke the holes that day is a little subjective. Bring the thread through the first hole. Now, you simply go back through the second hole and through the casing as well, through the casing of the book. Come out the other side. You want to get the thread relatively taut, keep the binding nice and tight. So I always like to double check it and just make sure as I go, and come back in the third hole here, so I'm down at the bottom. Come through the signature paper, of course, all the way tight through the last hole, And here I like to kind of wrap around my hand, just give it a little bit snug, just kind of like a guitar string there. Get it nice and tight. You don't want to over tighten it, especially on a thinner leather. It doesn't look very good, but you can play with that. Now you're ready for your second piece, or second signature here. And I like to kind of just start it like this. Sometimes you have to work this through. The thread can be kind of bulky. You gotta be careful when you're doing a bigger book. You'll have a lot more thread and you don't want to catch it on the signature paper as it can damage the edge of the paper, so be careful while you do that. With this one it's not so bad because it's a smaller size. So I get it wrapped around my hand and I pull it nice and taut. Then what I'm going to do is do a double knot up here with this end. Now I left an end of several inches. That's important. You're going to need that. Don't shortchange yourself here. You're going to want like 3-4 inches, maybe a little bit better, depends on how big your hands are. And that's why we leave so much extra in the first place. So that's important for later, but for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to do one knot. You can do just one. I like to do two. I particularly like a very secure binding on all the books that I do. Now you want to get this out of your way, so just kind of tuck it off to the side, and you're ready to do the third signature. So starting again at the top. Now ready here to tighten it once more. You can see it move just a little bit, and that's good. You don't want to over tighten it. You could also damage the pages, so it's a fine balance. Now this is pretty tight in this case, so what I'm going to do is all carefully get underneath the thread there, bring it up and create a little bit of a gap, and just kind of work it a little bit. You don't want to work it too much, but at the same time you got to be able to get that thick needle through there. And since it's a blunt needle that I recommend, you definitely you need a little bit of space because it's hard to fish it through there. So we've got it through, and that's important. That's a key part to your binding. Again, tighten it just in case it came a little loose while you're doing that. And then tuck it back in. Make sure it's nice and tight, once again, and you tuck it through the second hole at the top. Okay, just gonna work it in there, and what you want to do is tuck it through the second hole, and you want to bring it out just past the second signature. You don't want it to go inside the signature, and you don't want to go inside this signature. That can easily happen. If it does, no big deal, you just back it out. But this is where you need to go. Pull it through. All right, so now you have the needle pulled all the way through that second hole there, the top. Bring it across the back and behind the signatures all the way to the back of the book. So you can use a second needle here or just take the first needle off, close up the book a little bit here, and now you want to fish it through onto this piece that we left earlier. As I mentioned, this is important, so that's how you're going to create your final knot for the binding. So take this end and tuck it back through the first hole that you used. So this very first hole at the very back of the book, you want it to come out beside the signature again, just like that. Pull it out, keep it tight. And now, what you can do is, I do usually actually a triple knot. You don't have to do that. You can do single, I've seen that too for sure. Get it nice and tight though, get it right down in there so that it's not sticking out and it doesn't have room to move around. You don't want it to move around, otherwise it's just gonna loosen up on you. And then third knot, So what I typically do is I snip the thread about here. But again, if you want to reuse this piece of thread, it would work the same the next time you used it. So you could just undo those knots and start again if you wanted to the next time you go to bind it. So you could leave this whole piece of thread. What you can do is take your awl or your needle, and you can tuck this thread in here, in behind the pages, so it's not sticking out everywhere. Or if you don't mind it, you can just leave it right there. You can do whatever you want, basically. You could tuck it underneath the bottom too. It doesn't really matter. Or you may want to snip it just maybe a little bit shorter. If it's not bothering you and you want to reuse the thread, you can kind of do whatever you want. But at this point, the book is actually done being bound. And so it has that nice classic medieval binding look. I love it. I think it's pretty straightforward, which is great because that allows the people that buy our books to keep using that book however they want for as long as they want. And it's going to last a lifetime, probably longer. So it's awesome to think that people can keep putting their stories and special events and memories into these books for years and years. And that's why I love this binding so much. Today, we did a 4-signature journal, and each of those signatures had 10 pages in it. If I'm doing cardstock, because it's thicker, I do a little less pages, 5 to 7 usually. If you're using 24-pound or lighter paper, you could actually do 10 pages to maybe 14 or so. But if you're not cutting down the edge is going to creep out a little bit more here, and that means that the edge is going to get folded a bit as you're using it. If you don't mind that, it gets a little dog-eared, a little antiqued, then that's great. If you don't like that though, you probably want to stick to this is 10 pages, and this is pretty good. Like it's pretty got a pretty uniform edge on it, so it's not going to get too marred up if I don't cut the edge off of this. So in future videos, what we're going to show is the same style of binding, but on a larger book with more pages. So it's a little bit more confusing, not much really, but I think it'll be beneficial to show the two different sizes of books being bound. So it's you don't get lost somewhere in the middle. There's a few extra little steps in there that do make a difference when you're wanting to complete the binding. I'm going to show that in a future video. I mentioned this at the booth as well. If you don't have time to rebind your own books, you can bring them to a local bookbinding group. There's one here where we live that's a big one. They do it for free just to keep the trade of bookbinding alive. If you're in our area and you bought one of our books, you can always bring it back and we can refill them for you. Or if you want to buy refills for any size of book that we offer, and I'll include a needle and the thread that you need, and then you can just watch this video or the next one if it's a bigger journal. And you can just message me about that, and I'll add a listing to our website for you, and you can pick it up off there. And we'd be happy to do that for you and make whatever type of paper you wanted. So lined, unlined, cardstock, 24-pound, whatever you'd like. Okay, and finally, if you want to see a basic book like the one we did today with just the 4 signatures, but with a softer leather and without cutting down the edges and just kind of doing a little bit more rustic approach, I guess, or antiqued approach, just leave a comment down below and we'll do up a video showing that as well, just as a variation, and you can kind of see what that process looks like for a softer leather. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope you found our video today informative. If you did, please subscribe to our channel and click the little notification bell so you get notified as soon as we have new content out. We're going to be putting up more instructional videos as well as behind the scenes videos on making some of our pieces and what it's like to be a full-time artist and entrepreneurs.